DJI has been slowly building out its lens control ecosystem over the past few years, and while it seemed promising, it was too awkward to use and came with too many caveats. But now they finally consolidated all this tech into a standalone product called DJI Focus Pro, and it's ready for prime time. That is, if you manage to get your hands on one. DJI Focus Pro is a smart lens control system that is gimbal independent, camera independent and lens independent. It definitely was the star of this year's NAB trade show, and I think it's the most interesting product in our industry in a long time. And it goes beyond the surface level stuff of, hey, autofocus on manual lenses. I think it's a real game changer, and I don't throw that word around lightly. I believe DJI Focus Pro has the potential to disrupt the whole camera marketplace. But let's unpack that. Wait, why are we talking about cameras while the DJI lens control system is all about the lenses, obviously? Well, if you think about it, the most successful camera companies are actually lens companies, because it's way easier to sell you a bunch of lenses than cameras. Most professionals usually buy 1 to 2 camera bodies and stick with them for at least 4 to 5 years. And these days you get a whole lot of camera for your money, so there's even less pressure to upgrade. Lenses, however, are an entirely different ballgame. You might start out with just a simple kit zoom lens, but most likely you will want to build out a set of fast primes and then round it out with a trinity of 2.8 zooms. And then pepper in some specialty lenses like macros and super telephotos and tilt shifts and what have you. And by the time you are done buying lenses, they come out with Mark II versions and the whole thing starts all over again. That endless lens treadmill is really where the Sonys and Canons of the world make most of their dough. That is also how they lock you in. After you invest so much money into glass that only works with one ecosystem, the very idea of switching platforms becomes an intimidating prospect. Let's take a simple lens like this, for example. It's a fully electronic focus-by-wire lens that is completely reliant on a Sony camera to make it work. But when you put that lens on an FX6, a whole bunch of magic happens. You get vignetting, distortion and CA correction profiles, essentially making this lens perfectly clean. You can get focus breathing compensation, you can do smooth iris pulls, and of course you get the great, reliable and customizable Sony's autofocus. But if you remove the camera, this lens becomes essentially useless. And that's why people are so protective of their camera brand choice. Because if God forbid you bet on the wrong horse and have to change systems, you are out a big chunk of cash and your ego is hurt. And that's the camera version of ecosystem lock-in, pretty much like we have with Apple and any other tech company that likes to make money. So, where does DJI Focus Pro fit in all of that? Well, I'm getting to that. But before, let's examine the underdogs of camera market. Keeping the ecosystem lock-in in mind, it's no wonder that Sony and Canon reign supreme. Part of the reason is that they make their own sensors, while the rest of the bunch is forced to work with leftovers. But I think the main reason is that they have two of the strongest lens ecosystems on the market, with Sony's being the largest and the most open. And paired with that, they have their continuous autofocus that's been pretty reliable for the past 6 or 7 years. So there's been a whole generation of camera operators who've come to rely on autofocus and basically cannot imagine a camera system without it. They also invested thousands of dollars into mirrorless lenses that would be useless on competitors' systems. So while competition might offer lower prices and cool filmmaking features such as open gate anamorphic modes, false colors and internal ProRes recording, for a lot of people it's just not enough to look past the lack of AF. And vice versa, the rebels who stuck with their Blackmagics and pennies throughout the years take great pride in actually getting good with manual focus. Not being a slave to the autofocus also means that there is a whole new landscape of lenses open to you. Instead of spending thousands on clean and boring glass just for the sake of AF, you can use dirt cheap Soviet optics and catch all those artsy flares. Or better yet, you can tap into the growing market of affordable anamorphic lenses and get that unmistakable cinemascope look. But of course, no matter how good you get with manual focusing, it is still limiting. Manual focus slowly but surely forces you into wider focal length, forces you to stop down your lens to get a deeper depth of field, and of course move the camera less. Most of the time when shooting manual focus you are basically in a human tripod mode. So while you certainly can pull your own focus, the whole breadth of cinematic expression is not available to you when you do so. So up until right now you had to choose boring and clean and expensive glass but with unlimited movement thanks to autofocus, or manual focus with super interesting glass but limited movement. But no more. With DJI Focus Pro all of that changes. You no longer have to choose between AF and interesting glass. You can have both. At least that's the promise of the system. But even more importantly, this puts a huge wedge into the lens ecosystem lock-in. And in my expert opinion, it heralds a real disruption of the camera marketplace. Because you no longer have to live in the walled garden of your camera's manufacturer. You can choose whatever camera system you like, whatever glass you like, and outsource the autofocus to a third-party system. So for the first time in the digital era, you are completely free to choose your lenses and cameras independent of each other. Unless of course you just happen to have a first AC running around with you all the time, in which case, congratulations, nothing changes for you. But for the rest of us plebs, this is a whole new chapter and the potential consequences make my mind race. Let's wildly speculate. First consequence is that companies like Blackmagic, Panasonic, Fujifilm, Zcam, Kinefinity suddenly, through no effort of their own, become vastly more appealing options. If we remove AF as a point of comparison, suddenly these camera systems bring a whole lot bang for your buck. A camera like Ursa Cine, for example, now has my full attention, whereas before I wouldn't even consider it. Second consequence is that we have a whole new product category, and that is smart lens control systems. And DJI Focus Pro is just the first standalone product in this new category. Now, technically lens control systems are nothing new, and Preston's and RE ECS systems have been around on Big Daddy film sets for a long while now, but it's not the same thing. DJI Focus Pro is a hybrid MF-AF system that uses LiDAR telemetry in conjunction with image analysis, and that, as far as I'm aware, is a first of its kind. DJI, of course, has a leg up with their drone and gimbal expertise, but I see no reason why other companies couldn't enter this marketplace with their own offerings. And of course, like always with competition, we'll get lower prices and better products. Now, I myself don't have access to DJI Focus Pro to play with, and if DJI is watching, I'm happy to get one for testing and do a full review, but just based on the great video by the guys from CVP, the tech inside the Focus Pro is pretty amazing, especially considering that it's only going to get better from here. Now, this was the first question that jumped to a lot of people's minds, but I don't think it's anything to worry about really. For starters, first ACs have a lot more responsibilities than just pulling focus. Secondly, a fully hands-off autofocus system has no place in serious filmmaking and never will. And DJI Focus Pro is not that. It's a hybrid AF/MF system that is designed to assist the focus puller, not replace them. So it's just going to be another system that first ACs have to learn to operate, but it will make their cortisol level much lower when Zack Snyder wants to open up to T1 on a full-frame camera. So first ACs will really benefit from such system in the long run, not be threatened by it. And ultimately, I think questions such as these reveal the fundamental lack of understanding of what autofocus is and what it's not. Autofocus, whether it's image-based or LiDAR-based, is not and was never meant to be a set-it-and-forget-it type of deal. It still requires a lot of input and control on the operator's part, and you need to be clearly aware of how your lens choice and your autofocus settings affect the final result. Using the autofocus effectively is a skill that needs to be practiced just like manual focusing does. If you are on a Sony system and struggle with autofocus settings, I suggest watching this great tutorial by Philip Bloom to fill in the blanks. My personal stance on autofocus is pretty simple. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I've started my filmmaking journey thinking that autofocus is a non-negotiable must-have. But with practice and experimentation, I became very comfortable with manual focusing, and nowadays I actually find it more aesthetically pleasing. So if I'm shooting something for myself, I oftentimes use manual focus and of course manual lenses. But if I'm doing something critical for a client, well, that shit's better be in focus. And that's when I really appreciate being on a Sony system. But if I could be a little freer in my lens choice, but still have the comfort of a reliable AF system, that would be a huge boon for my work. And that's why I'm very excited for the things to come. DJI Focus Pro is a refreshing development in our industry, and I'll certainly be keeping my eye on it. And for what it's worth, it's going to make the choice of my next camera a lot more interesting. Thanks for watching. Actually, there's a favor I'd like to ask you. I spent 8 weeks making this video about dynamic range, and it got basically buried by the algorithm. I don't know if it's the length, or if I messed up the initial title or thumbnail or what have you, but what I thought to be my masterpiece turned out to be a complete flop. But I still believe that's the best video I've made to date, and it deserves your attention. So please find time to watch it and tell me what you think. And here it is.